Thank you, Senator Rosen. Ranking Member Paul has a few closing questions.
I think it's been a good discussion. Everybody seems to agree there's a problem. That's a good starting point. But like most of the discussions, I agree somewhat with Senator Blumenthal. The description of the problem is much easier than the actual availability of the answer. All four of you have said that there are a lack of incentives that lead to shortages. So what are incentives? Allowing the price to rise, removing price controls so prices can rise for a generic, particularly when they become the only one. When there's a shortage of supply, you have to allow the price to rise. So some have said, well, there's a race to the bottom on prices. Well, maybe prices are more elastic on the downward side than they are on the upward. So there aren't many regulations saying that you can't lower your price, but there are a lot of regulations that say you can't raise your price. So what happens is, you think about it, Medicaid and Medicare are at least half, if not more than, half. Their prices are stuck. If you have a shortage of doxycycline, the price needs to go up. The price won't go up for Medicare. But private insurance is pretty sticky too. The contracts are long-term, and they've made long-term contracts. The gas station, the prices go up and down every day. So they can meet supply and demand. You have to get to that. That's the answer. That is the answer. You have to allow prices to go up and down. It's sticky prices, inelastic prices that cause shortages. Now you say you want other incentives. What else can we do? Well, there's two other ways you could help companies. You could either subsidize them or give them a tax break. Now, people on our side of the aisle tend most of the time not to be in favor of subsidies, because if you give a subsidy to somebody who's not even good at something, you've squandered your subsidy. If you give them a tax break, they only get it if they're good at it, because you only get to deduct your profit. If you don't make a profit, the tax break doesn't do you anything. Now, we did once upon a time have huge tax breaks in Puerto Rico. It was a 100% tax credit. So if this body wants more American and closer to home production, reinstitute the Puerto Rico tax break. But I'd go one step further, and I agree with Senator Rosen. We have a bill that would take the opportunity zones that have been designed as poverty areas in our country, and there's a bunch of them in every state. We would say to the pharmaceutical industry, we're not just going to give you what the last tax bill did, we're going to go further, because really they haven't worked that well. I'm all for them. I called them economic freedom zones. I've been talking about them for 5-6 years. Jack Kemp talked about them 20 years ago. They never have really worked because the incentives haven't been good enough or have been too difficult to get the incentives. So let's make them bigger. Either a tax credit like we used to have, or lower or abolish the income taxes. Let's make it immediate, and let's let them start doing it, because they haven't moved because the incentive's not enough. So we could have more domestic production. And then the only thing I'll finish with is, I think we have to be careful as a country not to have irrational anger towards China. Look, I've been talking about the COVID coming from the lab for 2 years, so I'm not an apologist for China, but at the same time, I don't want to end trade with China. And it was mentioned here, you end trade with China, you want to see shortages, you're going to see a catastrophe. So we can't overnight do that. Should we encourage more production here? Yeah, let's have more production here. But let's don't be irrational in our anger towards China such that we disconnect and have no trade. Both of our countries have grown wealthy because we have traded, and we should be wary of that before we go further. But I think it was a great panel, and I hope people will take to heart that everybody believes we need more incentives. We have to figure out how those incentives can be put into action. Thank you all for coming.